Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event and to have the role of introducing Her Excellency the Governor-General. Ms. Bryce is well known for her work as a champion of equal opportunity, but she's also a great supporter of universities, and indeed when she and I first met in 1994, it was in connection with help that she was giving to my then university. So what better occasion than to invite her to speak at an event organised by a university on the topic of celebrating the contribution of women to public sector excellence. Please join me in welcoming Her Excellency the Governor-General.
Professor Haussegger, distinguished guests, good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Parker, for your warm words of welcome. How exhilarating is it to be in this room, a very significant place in our national capital, to celebrate the contribution of women to public sector excellence. This gathering is the best evidence that we could adduce for having such an occasion. It brings together women leading, inspiring, achieving, giving, learning, managing, creating in every field of public service, of public office. Service that signifies fine intellectual endeavour, practical import, commitment to the public ethos, to our community and to our country. I want to acknowledge the men who are here who believe in equality of opportunity for women and are supporters and advocates of this important democratic principle. My friends, as a girl of the 40s from Bush, Queensland, I could never have imagined what I see around me today. Certainly a very different world from the one that I came into. Soon after I was born, the Transportation magazine published some advice for male supervisors of women in the workforce. My favourite of the 11 tips: when you have to use older women, try to get ones who have worked outside the home at some time in their lives. Older women who never contacted the public have a hard time adapting themselves and are inclined to be cantankerous and fussy. And this one: those who are just a little on the heavy side are more even-tempered and efficient than their underweight sisters. Well, our time has come. In the Financial Review on Tuesday, mature women workers were described as silver foxes, and I'm quite pleased with that. I certainly prefer it to cougar. Ladies and gentlemen, I am thrilled that the project we engage in today will range across many decades and different generations of women, with all our unique stories and experiences to relate. I would like to compliment the reference group led by Professor Meredith Edwards and the support of the Australian and New Zealand School of Governance. I must say that I am drawn to the group's emphasis on celebrating achievement, on having fun with the project, while maintaining a strong commitment to gender equality in the workforce. Today's statistics give us the picture of both our achievements and our challenges in the Australian public service, where 20% of current secretaries are women, 25% of agency heads are women. At SES level, 37% of employees are women, compared with 4.7% in 1984, which was, of course, the year of the introduction of sex discrimination legislation across our country. And there is no doubt that in 2011 there are greater opportunity structures for women in the public sector. And there are some marvellous guides and mentors for women, as there always have been. I want to acknowledge the enormous debt of gratitude that I owe to mine. In 1978, I was appointed to the first National Women's Advisory Council, chaired by Dame Beryl Beaurepaire. My pal, Wendy McCarthy, and 10 other wonderful women drawn from all backgrounds were members. Council's role to advise government on issues of concern to women was supported by the Office of the Status of Women, then in the Department of Home Affairs and Environment. We used to call it House and Garden. I learnt so much from my colleagues in OSW who became lifelong friends. They taught me lessons that have stood me in great stead ever since, and indeed do today, about public policy, about how government works, about the structures, about translating our hopes and aspirations for reform into policy and legislation, about networking, about national and international machinery, and so much more. I especially remember the elegant writing of the director, Kath Taprell. I tried to emulate it and discard my own rather turgid legalese. In the early 80s, I left the cloisters of academe and joined the APS as Director of the Women's Information Service in Queensland, and the Office of the Status of Women was by then in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. For me, a new phase in a rewarding career, enriched by generous spirit and camaraderie, by truly remarkable people who inspired me, encouraged my ideas and enthusiasms, opened pathways, afforded me opportunities to engage in social and legal reform. People whom I admired and respected, who brought out the best in those around them. My friends, I well understand that we are in different times and there are different realities. Current generations of younger women may not feel as passionate about gender equality as the Silver Foxes did in the 60s, 70s and 80s. Some may take it for granted, and some, as your reference group noted, may even take the view that feminism was mum's job. Nonetheless, what is clear to me today, more than ever, is that gender equality must never slip off our social, legal and political agenda. We need to be constantly vigilant and downright dogged. It is never going to happen on its own because gender still makes a difference. Professor Haussegger, Professor Parker and the ANZSOG reference group, I congratulate you all on this terrific initiative. I'm looking forward so much, as we all are, to the robust debate and discussion that we're going to have. And I thank you for including me in a wonderful occasion of celebration of excellence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and indeed we are very, very grateful to have you here. And needless to say, we are all very inspired by the path that you have led and the example that you show. And to that I'd add, just recently I happened to be pointing out a photo of Your Excellency to a 5-year-old niece of mine who stopped me and she said, "Oh, I know who that is, that's the Queen." And I said, no, that's the Governor-General. She looked at me suspiciously and she said, "She can't be the General, she's a lady, she must be the Queen." Which of course segues very beautifully into our topic today, leadership, and does gender make a difference? Now, gender is a fundamental component of our identity and it affects just about every aspect of our social experience. But does it mean that women lead differently from men? Well, when the ANZSOG Institute group got together to discuss how we would celebrate the contribution of women to public sector excellence, it was interesting how very quickly our discussion developed what I believe are broad-ranging ramifications when we started talking about the issue of leadership and the effect that gender may or may not have. Does gender change the focus of a leader? Should it? Is the boardroom, now that we do have more women moving into positions of leadership in Australia, albeit the progress is very slow, but does the fact that there are more women in the boardroom, in the corner office, in the cabinet room, does that change the way that we do leadership? Should it? Is any difference real or perceived? And what's gender stereotyping got to do with it? Has an unconscious bias in the workplace encouraged women to adopt a male model of leadership? Now, we all know that the principles of leadership, vision, courage and wisdom, aren't gender traits. So why then has leadership traditionally been a male bastion? Well, to help unearth some answers to these very difficult and challenging questions, we've been joined today by 4 outstanding women leaders who are all inspirational trailblazers. Now, whether it was a predetermined intention or perhaps just chance and circumstance, each of these women has pushed through and excelled in what have traditionally been male bastions. Katy Gallagher came to politics from a background in social work and disability advocacy. She was elected to the Legislative Assembly 10 years ago and very quickly joined the ministry, serving in just about every portfolio, including the very important and crucial portfolio of Treasury. And she was elected as Chief Minister of the ACT in June this year. Wendy McCarthy is former Chancellor of the University of Canberra. She sits on numerous boards and has held executive and chair positions across government, corporate and community sectors. She's also held a number of international positions, including Global Vice Chair of Plan International. Wendy began her career as a teacher and over decades has become one of Australia's leading change agents and women's advocates, as well as establishing some of the nation's most successful mentoring programs for women in the private and public sectors. Natasha Stott Despoja is a former leader of the Democrats and South Australian senator. And back in 1995, at the age of 26, she was the youngest woman ever to enter federal parliament. And she did so wearing her Doc Martens. I knew you'd hate me saying that. I just have to say, I was presenting the 7:30 report in Adelaide at the time and did Natasha's first interview, and I couldn't take my eyes off her Doc Martens. But what fascinated me was that everyone in the media was talking about the Doc Martens. Well, at least they weren't talking about your hair. In 2001, Natasha became the leader of the Australian Democrats and was the youngest person of any party to hold such a position. Also that year, Senator Stott Despoja was selected by the World Economic Forum as a global leader for tomorrow. She left Parliament in 2008 and she now holds a number of directorships and sits on various boards and committees. She's also a visiting research fellow at the University of Adelaide, where she's doing her PhD, and a regular columnist for the Adelaide Advertiser and the Business Spectator. And Christine Nixon, of course, needs very little introduction. We've heard a great deal about Christine this week. According to the Prime Minister yesterday, when she was launching Christine's book, Fair Cop, Christine Nixon is a high-achieving Australian whose long journey of public service deserves our attention and our respect, and I would add, and our applause. Christine is a second-generation cop who really does have policing in her blood. She entered the police force in New South Wales in 1972, and I was stunned to learn that she was one of only 2 women in that intake. And at that time, the ratio of men to women in the police force was 70-1. Christine has served as the Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police for 5 years. There she was in charge of a staff of 14,000 and oversaw a budget of $1.7 billion. She was the chair of the Victorian Bushfire Reconstruction and Recovery Authority and oversaw the largest rebuilding and recovery operation Victoria has ever seen. Christine is now a fellow of a number of institutes, including ANZSOG, where she lectures on leadership and organisational reform and has developed a number of mentorship programs. Please welcome our guests. Well, Christine, because I finished on you there, I think I'll start on you for our discussion. Surprise, surprise. But as I said, we have been hearing a lot about you and from you over the last week, which at times has been very tough. Now, I thought it would be interesting to ask you this question. One of the very important research house in the US, Catalyst, which does some excellent work on gender diversity, produced a report in which they surveyed 12,000 business leaders across the USA and Europe. And they found that, among other things, the majority of respondents to the survey, all business leaders, believed that leadership came more naturally to men than women. What do you think? We'll start simply.
I suppose if you took into account their experiences that most of those men would have had, is very few of them, I think, even in the United States, would have seen numbers of women in senior leadership positions. So in some ways, I think their comments come from a position of ignorance, and that's a really sad thing. I think what I've seen over time is there are some other studies that I've seen in the United States, and I suppose my own experience and also my own questioning of a range of people about the kind of qualities that you need to be a good leader. What I've found when you start to do that women have those qualities in spades, and that they are clearly capable and able, but my view is still that we are limited by some of the stereotypes you just actually mentioned, because those people happen to be in charge of organisations. And I guess some of them were women, but I wouldn't have thought a large percentage. And so the problem, I think, is we're limited still in recognition that we have the skills and qualities needed to be leaders. And you just have to look around this room. But the barriers, I think, are still in place in some cases.
Okay, we'll talk about some of those barriers just a little bit later, but I would like to ask all of the panellists just their immediate response to that question, or the broader question, gender, does it make a difference to leadership? It's a complicated one. I think when we also consider that, quite frankly, if we look right around the world, of the 192 United Nations member states, there are only 19 nations that have a woman as the head of state, Australia, of course, being one of them. But also there is not one nation in the world in which women share leadership positions with men. So obviously gender makes some kind of difference. But I'm interested to hear what kind of difference that might be. Natasha?
Well, in response to your first question to Christine, the idea of men sort of being leaders or automatically assume leaders is something we do, because some of the stereotypes and role models we've had, and obviously, forgive me reflecting on the political arena, but up until recently, all the leaders of Parliament have been men. And it reminds me at the election when there was a debate between Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard, and a journalist wrote, Tony Abbott looked as prime ministerial as he could have looked. And I thought, well, what did Julia Gillard look like? Was, housewife, a gardener? What was it? Why was it? No, but our perception of leaders has inevitably been, by virtue of numbers, statistics, men. And therefore, I think a lot of those leadership qualities we tend to associate with men, even though, as you say, women not only have them in spades, but have demonstrated, and particularly in politics, business and industry in recent times, just how equally capable they are. As for whether or not we are different, I think that's a more complex matter. But when you've got more than half your population not equally represented in leadership or powerful positions in any institution, then clearly gender does matter.
Wendy?
Well, I often ask groups of people to imagine the pop-up that comes in their head when I say, who leads religion? Male. Who leads business? Male. Who leads government? Sort of female here, but we still probably struggle to get male or female. And who leads in the community? We might be more likely to get a woman pop up there. And they're the great clubs of the world. Everything is, all power is derived by that. So we need business for wealth creation, and traditionally men have controlled resources. We need government for regulation and management of our society. We need religion and spirituality, because that matters, and we need someone down in the grassroots and doing the community, and that's mostly us. Although as it's become more attractive lately, we have seen some high-profile businessmen moving in as long as they're president, because that's their natural leadership position. Now, I think that Simone de Beauvoir, whom I just recently reread, got it right when she said, when she went off to do her research to look at women, because Stott said that would be a good idea, and she needed something to divert her, and she said, I'll just take 2 weeks. Well, it took 2 years, because what she discovered is the normal paradigm was male, and we were the other. And when you're moving from a position of the other, you're always trying to redefine the space that you go to, and you have to grab that and you have to be opportunistic about it. So I think for women, it is still very challenging to know when to take that opportunity, because there's so much risk involved at so many levels, in order to be a leader. And then it's even more risky around, do I lead like him? And there aren't too many hers to model yourself on. And some of them, in both cases, we would rather not. So finding our own way, I think, is still hugely challenging. And as to whether we're different, well, we should come back to that, yes.
Okay, I think you've raised a really important point, though, there about the model, what you follow. Now, Katy, when you became Chief Minister, on that very evening, I did an interview with you for ABC TV News and was asking the obvious questions about how you felt. And I was really surprised by one of your responses when you said, look, I don't want to sound silly here, but I am different. In fact, I'll quote you. You said, I'm not trying to sound silly, but I think women in politics do behave differently from men. It doesn't make us weak, it just means we work differently. And then you went on to say, people underestimate how tough I really am, but you can be tough and gentle and fair and warm all at the same time. It's the kind of person I am. I thought it was a very brave thing to say. And to actually announce on the night that you had become Chief Minister, you know what, I'm different. Why did you do that?
Well, to be entirely honest, I was just trying to get through the day.
And she's thinking, oh, another journalist question.
Well, you were one of my last appointments of the evening. But it was the question I was asked the most and have been asked the most since taking the job is, am I tough enough? And I've found it really interesting myself because, as you said, I've been here for 10 years. I've held very senior portfolios. I've been the deputy. And then when I took that one step up to Chief Minister, all of a sudden everyone needed to know if I was tough enough, and there was some doubt about whether I was. And if I wasn't tough enough, obviously doubts would come from that about whether I could do the job or not. And John Stanhope always said to people that I had the spine, a metal spine. I think he used to say, you know, she's really tough, don't underestimate her. And I think people have. But as I said, I think you can have that toughness but be a whole range of other things, which I think probably do come and are more easily recognised in women, and bring that to shape your leadership and the style that you present. And I don't see it as a negative. I think there's a whole range of leadership traits which make up a good leader.
I wonder though if it sometimes can...
Which I'm trying to be.
If it sometimes can work against you though. Christine, for example, you mentioned in your book that there were times when your own advisors were saying to you, you're coming across as too soft.
Yeah.
You need to be tougher. And you said the whole boys' own stuff embarrassed you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of them sort of said they saw me as the kind of soft side of policing and, you know, versus the hard edge. And the point I was making is what they'd said to me was, Christine, go out there with the, you know, the special operations people and look tough with them, and, you know, or go and announce we've shot someone or arrested someone, or, you know, whatever. And I said, but I'm not the one, you know, particularly the more positive. I did get to, you know, apologise for as often. But the point was, I think they were saying to me, you know, go out and look like the boys and they'll stop picking on you for being a woman. And I went, oh, go away, you know. And I said go away for a couple of reasons, because I actually believe people who are doing the jobs need to get the credit for it, and they need to be the ones, you know, announcing we've done this or done that. So I just thought it was silly of me to have actually even thought about that. And so they stopped asking me after a while.
Isn't there a danger, though, that you look like you're ceding power to others if you hand it over like that?
You know, yes, I think that's exactly the danger you have. But, you know, you've got to have a confidence in your own capacity and your ability. And you know, being the Chief Commissioner gives you a fair bit of authority as well. And I knew they weren't going to sack me because I didn't go out and do something like that. So I think, you know, I wanted to be myself in the way I did the job, and I didn't want to have to play to the audiences in that sense. And so I kept doing it. But it's interesting because it has implications, and I have experienced some of that. And as someone, a journalist said the other day, Christine, you didn't desert, you delegated. And so, you know, there's a very interesting piece in there, because if you kind of don't want to be the one out the front and standing there for 15 hours and saying, look, I'm in charge here, and say as I did, I've got these fabulous people who are in charge doing the job, there are consequences. And I think, you know, sometimes we have to, you know, pay attention to those, but I don't think give up your own style is the answer.
Wendy, you have a lot of corporations, and indeed the public sector too, coming to you and to your business looking for mentorship programs for women. Do you advise women to given what Christine was saying, to perhaps sometimes try and just be a little bit tougher, don't cede power, cling on to it a little bit more, because that is required or expected?
Oh, I think that's a pile of rubbish, really. I think that if the definition of leadership is tough, it's not the kind of leadership I want to do. There are many ways to say what being tough is. What I hope that I help people when I'm mentoring them is to know what they stand for and how much they'll stand for. And somehow or other, if you work that out and you're in an organisation where you need to find your own voice so that people know what you stand for, then there are a whole lot of different leadership styles that are easily accessible and possible. And Christine, my observation was trying to define a new way of being a police commissioner. She also had, because I've looked at that, she also had a very different way of people reporting to her. And people who wanted linear, incremental, probably regardless of merit, the kind that used to be in the Department of Education, as long as you stayed there, you got the next job. They don't like that. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's too hard, and it's a long way away from being an authentic leader.
Just when you mention the issue of style, I think at this point we'll just have a little look at a couple of interview grabs. I did an interview with Professor Peter Shergold on this issue. Professor Peter Shergold, of course, was the head of the Department of PM&C for many years and an advisor to government and the Prime Minister, and was very instrumental in trying to bring more women into senior roles, and in 2004 was there very much responsible for bringing 4 more women into the role of departmental head. And at the time, there were 18 departments, there were 2 women, and so he increased the ratio to 6. And at the time, one of the newspapers had the big headline, "Glass Ceiling Smashed." And I thought, well, that's interesting, a third. We've reached a third, and it's considered to be smashing the glass ceiling. But anyway, Peter Shergold had some interesting things to say about women in leadership. And I just must say, in fairness, that this interview was a very long interview, and I've only taken very short pieces of it here, so bear with me. But I started off by asking him if women leaders operate differently from men, and this is what he had to say.
I think there is a certain style that women have. I go careful here. I don't believe there is a single, feminine style of leadership. I do think that women, through their training and the way they've been brought up, tend to be at meetings, particularly meetings of 10 or 15 people, rather more self-effacing in terms of how they put themselves forward, quieter, often qualify what they say, often even give the impression that they're somewhat reticent at putting forward their views. In my view, that certainly works against women, which is why I believe that it's only when you have a significant proportion of women who are in the leadership group that it starts to have a significant effect. Often if there's just 1 or 2, it's very hard to work in that environment. They tend to come at issues more circumspectly, more quietly, do their homework beforehand. I'm talking in general terms, and I think probably that works against them. And I think it is a need to not just ape, if you will, sort of male, I'm in charge behaviour, but be more confident and assertive. If I was training women today, that was one of the things I would say to them. You can be, both collaborative and assertive. The two can go together, I think. If you think about leadership, We know today it isn't just about, mastering the evidence and knowing the detail. A lot of leadership, particularly public sector leadership, is about emotional intelligence. It's about how you negotiate, how you get compromises. Policy is this iterative process of meetings, it's working with people. Politics is about people. Now, for that, I think it is a different sort of leadership qualities that are required. Unfortunately, men can sometimes tick the boxes and go through what processes they think to look as though their behaviour has changed. But often my experience is they don't walk the talk because their attitude really hasn't changed. And that although they will know in certain environments they have to behave in a certain way, it isn't reflecting the way they actually look at the workplace and leadership. And so I think that's what we have to tackle.
And that's a very difficult thing to tackle, because what you're talking about are inherent prejudices.
They are. But of course, again, that's why I think things like changing the balance of a group alters, not because of the particular 4 women you bring into the leadership group, but because it actually changes the environment within which you're working. It does get the men there to think about how they might need to modify their behaviour. And of course what you hope is that then, like many forms of culture, it becomes the natural way of doing things.
Okay, we'll just leave it there. Now I can see you shaking your head. And as I said, in fairness, this has been taken out of a much longer interview, but he raises some points that are often made about women in leadership, that they're not assertive enough, or that they are a little reticent, certainly work harder than others, are the last to leave the office, all that sort of thing. There's some truth in what he's saying, isn't there?
And I'd be mentoring women to get over that, because I think there is some truth in that. I think we're more respectful in groups about, we raise children, for God's sake. We tell them not to interrupt and not to do these things and to behave in a certain way. And suddenly we get into a workplace and we're being asked to do those things and rewarded for them. The antithesis, my mother said, never be bold. And, you need to be bold. And so there are ways of helping people just get through that. And it can happen very, very quickly. It doesn't take very long at all. And I think that to keep that sense of women are much more, in my experience, inclusive of giving credit to other people. And I don't see that as a weakness.
So you don't see that as giving away or ceding
No,
power?
I don't. See it as a strength. But you need to have a reasonably diverse team, because if you've one woman with, say, 11 men, I've been in that position, they're quite slow learners at that, because they're all competing to take the kudos themselves, because that's what they've been socialised to do.
But I think when I hear Peter talk about self-effacing, quiet, little reticent, I'm like, you need to see more Senate committees, because, and hence the danger in generalising. Yeah. And that is, I think the critical point that Peter made in that interview was critical mass. Because I'm in a position now where I've joined a number of not-for-profit boards, and in some circumstances I was clearly in the minority, and it was like going back to Parliament all over again. 1995, 14% of Parliament was female when I first walked in, and so going on to a couple of boards and experiencing that again, it does make you a little, less self-assured. It does ensure that you do your homework and you're careful before you contribute something. But numbers will make the difference. And when we've got critical mass, whether it's in politics or elsewhere, that's when we can be as diverse and different as men are encouraged to be. And we won't have to generalise about, female characteristics or male characteristics. But having said that, Virginia, I'm on a medical research institute, and the Burnett, and my husband's on the Baker Research Institute, which is next door, and he always laughs. We get on the plane, go to Melbourne, go to our respective meetings, and he says, "You've read everything twice, haven't you? You're such a girly swat, Yeah. And he says, you'll and it almost...
Whereas he'll turn up and just wing it.
That's it. And he sees that as a characteristic of women v men, and he also says the difference is when he goes into a board meeting where there are women represented or more women, he says the absence of egos is quite palpable. You can see that difference. And I don't know if that'll change when we start to get as many board and other positions as men. I don't know. And if it does, then, so be it, because it's all about our diversity as well. But I think, a few more Senate committees for Peter Shergold, I think.
I think it's this kind of preparation. I remember as the Chief Commissioner, I used to do a lot of work. So I did have a big team, and Wendy, I had 20-something people reporting to me. But I used to do the work, and let me tell you, it made the rest of them do the work afterwards as well, because they knew I knew more than they did. And so there's an advantage in some ways, but it made the boys lift their game because they need to be on top of the work as well. So I think we do work hard. And I've sat on some boards where I've read everything and other people haven't. But it's also about, I think recognising that you want to make a good contribution, and maybe, that's not a harm. I don't think. I think that's a positive.
I think when I attended my first cabinet meeting, when I was appointed, the cabinet was 4 men, and I joined as the 5th member. And I won't expose my colleague. As the first woman, but the 5th member of the cabinet. And I won't expose my colleague, but I walked in and the comment was, "Yikes, there's a girl in here." And it was a real eye opener to me. And yes, I had read my cabinet papers twice, and so and it was like a first day at school. I was there, pencil sharpened, ready to go. And that was the first comment I got, and it just put me back in my box just for a little while. It did.
Why did it put you in your box?
Well, because it was quite confronting for a start, because I'd never thought about it in that terms at all. And then all of a sudden I did look around the room and went, hang on a minute, yes, I am the only woman in this room. And I think what it did, and perhaps this goes to Christine's point, is, I probably did hold back for that first few months until I felt confident that I was a legitimate member of that leadership team, that I'd done the hard yards, I'd put in the work, it had been recognised that I had an equal voice at the table. And now, of course, I run the show, so it doesn't matter.
I think it's interesting though, you've all admitted that I'm saying we because I do it too, I always read my board papers twice, but we're girly swats. Why is it that women do that? Why are we so much more inclined to put in the extra hard yards when we know that our male colleagues aren't doing it?
Maybe we think the job's worth doing.
Yes.
We don't take it as a reward, we take it as a gift and a task and a challenge. And I have to say that I chair 3 boards and I sit on 3 others, and I still read my papers. And if I didn't, I'd say when I walked in, because you only got them to me last night, I didn't have time to read them, or I haven't had time to read them, and I might go outside and just, do a quick swat. But I just think, why would you join a leadership role or a board unless you cared about it?
It might also, I don't know, to do with the fact that, again, I know critical mass, but that sense of expectation and wanting, because I still believe that women, particularly in positions of power, politics or elsewhere, are subject to greater scrutiny, higher expectations, are judged differently, perceived differently, that when you are in that sort of minority space, you know that there are fewer opportunities to fail. You are judged very harshly, and sometimes in a way that arguably your male counterparts are not. So I think women are also conscious of that, yes, it's an important job and it's a job worth doing, and you should do your homework. And having said that, I know a lot of male directors who do their homework too. But you're also conscious that you are more visible in some ways by virtue of being different. And while that difference should be, we should be at a point where we respect and celebrate that difference, we're not at a position in Australian society because the numbers just don't reflect the same level of power
But
given
I don't
to women.
feel that anymore, and that's a factor of age as well, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that when I sit happily when I'm not the chair, or happily when I'm the chair of the organisation, I don't see myself as, and I haven't for a long time, and you will get through it.
Actually, Wendy, having said that, I think the boards where there is, equal representation,
It's
some of
fine.
the which are, it's very different. And I sit around the room and I look, and female and male directors operate much the same way. There's no, and that's been a revelation, and it's been wonderful, because I would still argue the political arena is a very different one, or women in public
so's
life
business.
generally is a different
The
arena.
issue of critical mass, of course, is terribly important. And on that point, I'd just like to throw now to one more couple of interview grabs, and this time with Professor Peter Leahy. Now, Peter is with us today, so this is difficult for him to watch as we I've cut his interview into tiny weeny pieces and again taken it sort of out of a much longer context, so I do apologise, Peter. But he made, again, some interesting points that touch on the issue of critical mass. Peter, of course, is a former Chief of Army and had a very distinguished career in the military for 37 years and is highly decorated. Once he left the Army, he has joined the University of Canberra as a professor and foundation member of the National Security Institute, but also has a very broad experience in the wider community and particularly on boards. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear what he had to say when I asked him if gender makes a difference to leadership.
I see leadership as really being quite steady. It changes with the situation, and I see it changing with the situation regardless of gender. Now, again, because of my military background, and I was an infantry officer, and that's not a place where you see a lot of females, and I'd spent most of my time either in the infantry battalions or training people in the battalions and so on. So I don't have a lot of experience with female bosses around me. Later in my career, I saw more of it, certainly at the senior level, and happily what we're able to do later in my career was start promoting many females through positions not only as officers but also as NCOs, and I think in a military context it's important to see those two different things because again it's situational, what was the job.
Given your vast experience though, do you think it is possible that men lead differently from women?
I think the externalities of it might be a bit different. The blokes can tend to be a bit buffy, they can tend to be a bit loud and raucous. I don't think we see that much from females, but in terms of what are the actual things that you're trying to achieve as a leader, I don't see a lot of differences. And a leader, to my mind, is someone who's putting out a vision, someone who's looked to the future, and someone who's showing us the way to go, someone who, regardless of the organisation, has a sense of this is what we want to achieve, someone who gives a sense of inspiration, someone who is there to say, well, there's some issues, there's some problems, but this is what we're trying to achieve now, let's all work together. You've asked about my broader experience. I'm on a couple of boards, commercial stock exchange companies, and certainly, and I hope with one of them I've been giving a bit of sense, well, come on, guys, what about selecting a female board member? Well, we've tried pretty hard, and it's been difficult. In fact, we thought in one of the boards we were pretty close to it, but then someone said, well, why don't we interview this bloke? And he blew them out of the water. And so I think it's a matter of skills and capabilities.
So you're suggesting that there aren't enough women with the capabilities to join a board?
Certainly in that narrow experience that I saw, we set out with the intent, and we've since put a female on the board. So maybe it's that we didn't see the right ones at the right time.
Just on that though, it's often stated in the literature that boards tend to employ in their own like. In other words, they will take on new board members just like themselves.
And you could accuse the military of the same thing, and it was something because I was a promotion authority in the military. You'd pick someone like yourself with the same sorts of experiences. And
that's an ongoing problem.
It is, but we purposely set ourselves aside from that to say, let's actually go for the merit and the talent. So back to the board, we set ourselves a task of working hard to put a female on the board. As I've said, we've now succeeded. But in that narrow part, that early stages of looking, we found, and I had to remember my board responsibilities is to do the right thing by the shareholders. So you put the best person you can into the position, and the same with the military, where your shareholders are the soldiers whose lives are at risk. So you're going to make sure you get the right person. And happily we've done that now, but I think back to your broader point, it's a matter is that there isn't that broader talent pool, and it's a matter of just building it up and in some ways being patient.
What are your 3 top tips to any woman who is aspiring to a position of leadership, not necessarily within the military, but broadly? What would you say?
They'd be very similar to what I'd say to males, but I think in the first instance, and this is where the difference would be, is be yourself. Don't be false. Don't try and exist in what you think is a male world. Be true to yourself, be true to who you are, how you've been brought up and what your values are. And then I think it's, again, you're on show every day. Set and maintain standards, set the example. People are watching all of the time. There's a real intensity about the military organisation that you're never off show. You're always seen, you're always going to be judged. I still dress the same way I was taught when I was 19 or 20 because that's the way I was taught. I was told that's the right thing to do. It's pretty sad, I know, but
I wasn't going to say that.
but it's be true to yourself, be true to the organisation, and give that sense of vision. Give that sense of, I want to take you somewhere, because we talk about leaders. I think what's really important is we talk about followers, because a leader without a follower, they're not doing anything. They're just standing out there, and quite often it's illustrative to sort of, a leader should look around every now and again and see if there's anyone actually following. So understand those people that you're, again in the military's case, you're in charge of, you're responsible for. And I suppose, and it's more than three, so I apologise for that, but I suppose the last thing is to remember, and this I think came from my experience later in my career, but in command positions, in those really intense leadership positions, you have to remember it's a very, very lonely place because you're responsible. It is really very lonely because there's no one to turn to say, how am I going?
Okay, and we'll just leave it there. Some very interesting points made there. Wendy?
One of the most interesting pieces of research done the last 3 years is done by McKinsey's, and very big study of looking at how you measured leaders. And there were 11 issues that you got points for, and women topped 10. And the one they missed out on, and they came quite low on it, was about envisioning. So women did not create the vision within the organisation, which kind of supports what people are saying back here, that we facilitated agreement and consensus and so on, but we weren't the heroic figure out the front saying this is where we're all going to. And while we might all snipe at a military model and so on, and we know that we're all influenced by that, but we didn't have that, and all of the others, knowledge, negotiation, etc., way ahead. But one of the most critical things for a leader was this capacity to envisage. And McKinsey sat on this stuff because it came from their clients for about 3 years because they didn't want to put it out in the ether because they thought it was such a negative thing to do. And finally came out about 18 months, 2 years ago. And it really shocked people because it said that that was such a barrier to women that that's what you had to unpack in order to enable women to get through. And they said critical mass was actually not that important, that once women got to the envisaging stage, everything was possible because other women came with them. And the critical mass issue sort of sorted itself out.
But you made a very interesting point in your recent essay in the Griffith Review, Daughters of the Revolution, where you talked about how during the women's movement, leadership was shared. And the women who were being leaders seemed to accept they'd be leaders and then they'd be followers and then they might be leaders again, then they'd be followers. So there's this sharing going on. Perhaps that also has had a dramatic effect.
I think it's had a huge thing. We thought leadership was bad because the way blokes ran the place was bad, and we therefore said if we keep it on a hierarchy and we just move in and out along the spectrum. But I think, and even at Beijing, Mexico and so on, it wasn't until we got to Beijing, we still didn't say women in leadership was a crucial issue across the world. We said women in decision making. So we actually, as a global community of women who do talk to each other, had not got to leadership until about 2005. So we're very short on background and imprinting in this. It's the script still with, the documentary without the script. We're writing it as we go.
I guess the other piece, I think there's also worthwhile looking at what a lot of the new leadership thinking looks like.
Yes.
I mean, I'm aware of the McKinsey stuff, and I'll give an example of my own on that. But I also think you need to look at people like Ron Heifetz in the United States, and you need to look at Amanda Sinclair on her discussion about what leadership really looks like, because I think the kind of the way the women have been doing this over time fits much better with their models of leadership. And I certainly, have a strong view. I studied with Heifetz 20 years ago and have used that model as a way to influence organisations to achieve. And I think, we need to think a bit differently about that leadership from what we'd been taught before. Just one point. I applied for Victoria Police and said, when Braxy asked me, you know, what's my vision for the future, I said, I could tell you what a great organisation looks like, but I'm not going to tell you. I said, because it's about what do the members want, what does the evidence tell us, what do you want as a government, and what does the community want from us, and that will be the way we'll go forward. And so, you know, I could have told people, and I'm sure Wendy can, and so could other women actually, but the point is you actually say, what's the point of that? It is about all of us coming together to figure out how to go forward on those issues, and that's a far better change strategy, far better leadership from my view.
Yeah, but you also have had a lot of pushback against your style because of that.
Oh no, look, I've had a lot of media comments on it, you know, and let me
Blasted
tell you,
media.
No, I mean, let me tell you, I'm not sure that the way, you know, news organisations are led is all that exciting, you know, either.
Or productive or creative.
Or productive or creative. Ask some of the people who work for media organisations. So I think, you know, in a sense, they've pushed back because it's not the hard-end male model, you know, which is what people were trying to tell me to do. And I think, you know, that's a piece why you get a pushback, because they don't like it, because it's about giving up power. It's about, you know, using your authority differently. It's about encouraging and you know, creating enthusiasm for lots of people to be leaders.
Okay. Are you suggesting, Christine, and actually I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, Katy, that it is in fact a negative, or it's a dangerous thing for the media to, and public, to be discussing leadership differences between men and women? Should we not be doing that? Should we be talking about a gender blind kind of situation where there is no difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think leadership should be examined without necessarily the gender overlay. I mean, what are the qualities we want in a leader? Whether that's a male or female leader, it probably should be a secondary consideration. I think going to Christine's point around, I've had exactly the same issue around vision. I think the second question I got after I'd established that I was clearly tough enough for the job was, well, what's your vision? You know, and your vision has to be different than the people that have come before you, and if you have no vision, therefore you're not going to be good at this job either. And after sort of reflecting on the fact that I was so busy to actually have a vision at the time, like I was just getting through the day and making sure the house didn't fall apart, that I would reflect briefly at the end of the night on what my vision was and have all this self-doubt about it. But I took the same view as you, that you sit down, you get across your detail, you work with people, you pull together, and you work out a way where you want to move forward as a community, and that's what a leader's job is. The leader's job wasn't to come out on day one and say, bang, 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 these are the things I'm going to do, stuff the rest of you, I'm on my, and vision, you know, but it was... vision. Yeah, it's my vision, and it's right. So it's a very, you know, I can see that for many women, sometimes I think we're just so busy, you know, just getting to work and getting through the day. I'm not sure we reflect and I certainly don't reflect on what type of leader I am and what my leadership skills are, and I never have. All I know is I'm here, people have expectations of me, I have responsibilities, and I get up and get through the day, and then we start again the next day. And it works so far.
It's certainly working. Natasha, you mentioned before the issue of scrutiny, which I think is a really interesting one, because it no doubt does affect how women in leadership positions present themselves. You had a pretty tough time for a range of reasons, but particularly being young, female, blonde, coming into the parliament. How did you deal with that?
People laughing.
Well, she's still young, I mean.
No. But it's interesting because I guess in some ways, Wendy, this goes to my point about critical mass. Yeah. Not necessarily that it adds to a vision or, you know, makes policies necessarily any better, but just more women represented or equal numbers in any powerful institution. I mean, of course it's fairer, so you hope that, you know, ultimately leads to better decision making, but it's the novelty factor, which I think is a fundamental difference. And when we stop talking about women leaders, women not an adjective by the way, it drives me nuts, or you know, women this, you know, women politicians, women prime minister. I mean, it's extraordinary that apart from the grammar side of things, that we are the difference. We are, you know, it is not the norm, and so that novelty factor, so that we don't assess women in terms of their hair or their docs or whatever it may be. And that's not to say that women, just like men in positions of power, can't be multifaceted. Because I'm a big fan of, if I wanted to put on a pretty dress or a sensible shoes or whatever, surely that's legitimate. Surely in the same way that, you know, that Jeff Kennett's strode it down a catwalk, or Joe Hockey puts on Shrek ears, or Alexander Downer wore fishnet tights. Okay, not brilliant career decisions, but you've got that image now, haven't you? But not considered, and I still harp on about this because I think that why does that distinguish you or even considered a career ender or a questionable...
But for some women it has been a career ender.
Exactly.
I mean, you think
It's
of Cheryl
unfair.
Kerner with the feather boa.
Classic
that was
example.
A shocking image for a lot of people.
But, you know, so what if a woman makes a style misjudgment or a media whatever? There's an element of, does this necessarily mean that her IQ is lower, her policy abilities are lessened, her communicative skills are somehow, impaired in some way? You know, in politics people make mistakes. They do things that are considered, usually by the media, not necessarily by the community, I might add, to be, bad judgments. We all made errors. But when we get to a point when women are not judged in the media, whether it's the Prime Minister, Katy Gallagher, anyone else, Governor General indeed, Your Excellency, where your dress sense is often more discussed than, or your parental status or your marital status, when that is still an element of discussion in a way that men do not have that debate take place. So when we've reached a point where it's just the norm, then maybe we can celebrate our differences in a very different, healthy, respectful way.
Given though that, just on politics, as you said, when you came in 1995, I think the representation of women in federal parliament was only about 15%, we're now up to 30%. So there has been an increase to what some consider to be an important critical mass, a third, although it's not enough. And yet we still have situations, as we've had recently, when, for example, Senator Penny Wong was stopped and meowed at by Senator David Bushby. Now, you hit the media after that when you wrote in Business Spectator, saying that that was just disgraceful in the 21st century. Oh, clearly it's disgraceful, but that would indicate, wouldn't it, that even having more and more women around, and plenty of women in cabinet now, and a female Prime Minister, those sorts of prejudices and issues with having women in power still exist.
They still exist, but they've, we've moved. There's no doubt there's been progress, and I have to look back and remember that sometimes, where we have female executive, deputy leader of oppositions, we have head of state who is, etc., etc. So we've improved, and that's what made Senator Bushby's behaviour on that occasion so disgraceful. But 30%, I can't get excited about 30%. No. I can't. I think,
it's
how many...
It's not even a takeover proposition.
It's forever the businesswoman. But indeed, and so I think those figures are not only lamentable, they're disgraceful in a country that gave women the right to vote and stand for Parliament in 1902. It still makes me shudder.
And women top of the OECD in graduating out of universities.
Indeed. But yes. And just one other thing on that. Women who pave the way sometimes confront some of these stereotypes worse than others, but you do that so that women who follow you don't have to. Yeah. And, Katy follows in a marvellous tradition. She's had chief ministers who've been female in the ACT. We now have a female Prime Minister. All of these things will break down some of the ridiculous stereotypes and assessments, and that's why we celebrate it. But 30%, piss weak, really.
Just on the numbers, Wendy, you've been at the forefront of a lot of legislative change in Australia to pave the way for more women, not only to get into Parliament, but business, boardrooms. And yet you wrote, again in the Griffith Review just recently, that these policies and guidelines haven't delivered as much as we hoped they would. They're not sufficient to deliver women leaders. Why?
Oh, I wish I had a pat answer for that, but I don't. I think it is a very complex thing. I think if I go back to my original feminist passions of education and family planning, we call it fertility now, let's call it family planning. We've achieved in education by getting women to tertiary education, girls finishing high school, etc. And I think we imagined that's all we had to do, and change would be linear and incremental, because that's what we saw in men's careers. If we were looking, and we probably weren't looking that hard, we're probably doing what Katy says, getting through the day. I think with family planning, what's one of the really interesting things, that is the perfect case of the wicked problem with the exquisite dilemma. The wicked problem was to enable as many women as possible to manage their fertility, because that was one way that you'd be sure you could be able to manage your career. What we didn't realise as the demographics shifted, I was born to an 18-year-old mother, My first child was born when I was 27, and her last child was born when she was 26 in that family. She had one many years later, but for the sake of the exercise. My daughter had her first child. I had my last child at 32. She had her first child at 32. Think of that demographic shift in a 40-year period. It is truly astonishing. So we end up down this other end with issues, which around IVF, assisted parenthood and so on. And so all the things that we'd educated and planned for in careers, when men are getting careers, women have deferred many of their major life decisions further down. So we have lots of dilemmas that we didn't anticipate. We just couldn't see that future.
So are you suggesting that women, when at that point in their career when they really ought to be taking up opportunities that would lead to leadership in their late 20s and 30s, they're busy perhaps having their first child, getting married, doing those sorts of things?
They were diverted. I mean, if you look at medicine and you wonder why you don't have many women obstetricians and gynecologists, because you don't get into a college till you're about 32. 32, you've got other things happening in your life. So we haven't found that rhythm where people can progress through. Now, the good news is we live 7 years longer than men, so we do have time to collect and pick it up. And we have to keep saying that, and we just have to work out how we do it. But I really don't think we had any sense of the future we were creating. We were dealing with the issue then, and now we have to think about that. And that's a wonderful problem to have.
Yeah, look, I think the other piece here is having watched, a lot of women come into policing from, the few of us who were there when I started, and then I think, there are about 44% of the applicants now to join policing, and of course we've now, I think New South Wales has got about 36%, Victoria's a bit behind, but the fact is we got a lot of women through, and we've got them through, I have to say. The fact they had children, but it took a lot of work and a lot of thinking about how did you make the most of that. And I'm still not convinced that we've actually figured that out at all. And the work structures, the part-time, the flexibility that allows women to continue in their careers and have babies. I mean, it always seems to me a bit of this revelation that women have children. It's like, did we not get this? And why have we not solved it? And I watch policing solve it. I mean, very male-dominated occupation, but you took, women assistant commissioners in New South Wales. One has 2, the other has 3 kids. New South Wales has a number of women senior positions now who've had a number of children along the way, and they are able to achieve. And I think we still need to pay a lot more attention to that kind of flexibility to get rid of the attitudes. And I think the other process, which I can't help but take this chance to say, is our methods of selecting women for positions needs to be much better than it's ever been. When we changed the systems in New South Wales after the Royal Commission, we started to see women just pour through because the blokes had sat on the selection panels. They looked and went, you don't look like me, you're not getting the job. And no matter what you did, you couldn't get it. Once we got the women to apply, which is important as well, we started to see them coming through. And I think, there's still a lot of organisations, and particularly partnerships, and particularly some corporations who haven't figured that out yet. You need better selection systems to get even women through the door.
There's no doubt there is a problem of people employing in their own like and boards employing in their own like. Katy, you haven't come up against that though at all, really, have you?
Up against what?
Well, any sort of a sense of discrimination being female in your political career.
Yeah, well, I was mistaken as a tea lady once when I was the acting chief minister. I was about 100 months pregnant and sweating at the time, so and I was late to the meeting in Sydney, so I still haven't really...
Did you have to stop and say, no, actually, I'm the acting chief minister?
Yes, it was awkward. I walked in and the chair of the ministerial council said, we're not ready for morning tea. And my heart just sank. I thought, this is going to be terrible. Anyway, I did get on with it, and everyone was very apologetic. But I've had things like, I had 2 babies in the last electoral term, and aside from not handling my fertility very well, I did, I felt very much the responsibility to have me balancing that and working very publicly. I think going to Natasha's point of sending a message and trying to encourage the next generation of female leaders. And there were times when I was breastfeeding those babies, you know, in cabinet, when I wished I wasn't being a trailblazer in that regard. But I had comments, you know, I was told I was a part-time mother and a part-time minister, and, you know, and I mean, those things go to your core, and they send a message, and they were public statements made about me. They send a message to women that if you want to have children and you want a career, then just think about it, because you're going to face these kind of comments. So I have to say I've been very lucky, and in a way, the male leaders have sort of assisted me and sort of challenged some of those biases. But I have to say they're there, and you just have to confront them and move on, is my view. But I've had them, they've been at the fringe, yeah.
Natasha, have you had times when you have wished that you weren't a trailblazer? You just wish it would all go away?
I'm sure there were times when it all seemed just a little too hard. I love Katy's comments. I remember one of the best things when I went on a delegation, I was breastfeeding my son, and someone rang up from the Parliamentary Liaison Office and said, "Could we have your breastfeeding schedule?" It's just like, it doesn't work that way. But having said that, that's it. I always admire, you know, I remember poor Kirsty Marshall when she was ejected from Victorian Parliament, and all I could think of was, you know, when I had my first child, I just thought mine was never that discreet and sweet and lovely. There's no way, it wouldn't have happened in the Senate. But anyway, look, I think that by virtue of going into a profession, male-dominated or otherwise, and you recognise that maybe you're doing something that other people haven't done before, that you accept that responsibility and you're proud about it. And I'm a real believer, this is the one thing in terms of where you say, you know, does gender inform how you act, or should it make a difference? Well, it's always made a difference to me, not specifically in how I've been judged or perceived or what have you, but because as a feminist, I always knew and learnt that my responsibility was not to attain power for the sake of it. It was about doing what you could for the women who followed you and for other women in your community. So, you know, but I was imbued with that, you know, from my mum. So there's a strong sense of that. And perhaps in return I have high expectations of other women, fairly or unfairly, trailblazers, be they the Prime Minister, you know, or other female leaders in other professions and politics, and that is, you know, I do expect that. So yeah, you know, it's brilliant to be considered a trailblazer or a role model, but let's look back and acknowledge what some of those women have done, whether it's the Joan Kerners or the Cheryl Kernos, you know, the Carmen Lawrences, you know, and obviously Julia Gillard and even, you know, Julie Bishop. I mean, you think of 30% doesn't mean a lot when we still have women being pitted against each other in the debates in the way that men in leadership or other contests never seem to have that same. So I think, you know, not very, very proud of it, but I share Katy's, I can look back now and laugh at some of those experiences.
And I'm sure there are many women leaders that can't or don't laugh at some of the things that have been put to them, again through the media, because of their femaleness. But you've both raised, or all of you have raised, the issue of fertility and having children. For women who don't have children, as we know, and the Prime Minister's a key example, that can be used against them because somehow they are an unnatural woman. And you know, it's got to be said, some of the slogans that have been used lately to describe our Prime Minister have been quite extraordinary and have left many of us with our mouths open. But I just want to raise an article that was written by Malcolm Farr, a very well-known political commentator who works for News Limited, who wrote a piece in the journalist magazine, the Walkley magazine, so most of you wouldn't have seen it, but I thought it was fascinating. It was titled, "She Who Must Be Flayed." And he actually talked about how his own horror at the treatment of, the sexist treatment of the Prime Minister. And he went on to say, and I'll just quote this, and he said in public and in the media, he went on to say, it's as if, he said he's convinced that there's a male core in politics and the media who, and I quote, privately list her gender as a disqualification from holding the top job, the top leadership. It's as if some believe a law of nature has been upturned. Now, I think there's some interesting truth in that. Why is it, though, that here in the 21st century we're still struggling with that notion that a woman in that position, a top job, who might be childless, that somehow it's unnatural.
And doesn't really deserve it.
If she had kids, we'd be criticising the amount of time she wasn't
She spent
spending with her
with the kids.
family.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
sometimes, arguably, women in public life can't win. And having said that, whether you're a mother or no mother, I think mother guilt and women's guilt's pretty corrosive. But look, I love it. The idea that Malcolm Farr is a born-again
Shows he's come a
feminist
long
is
way.
just, yeah, I might show him a few newspaper clippings that I've got from, no, but I mean...
Well, it's interesting. It is a discussion currently in the press gallery, more and more so, and it's coming, interestingly, from senior men.
And I hope it should be. And I mean, I've listened to some of the comments they've made about Julia, and being a single woman in a you know, as I was, and without children in a leadership position, I've had all of the ridicule about that. And then they've added a few more things to it as well. But it is about a way that they try and get at you. And I think in Julia's case, I think I heard someone call her unengaged. Now, what does that mean? And it means, gee, she's not married to her husband. It's like, it was just, and in a sense, I watch, males leap about the place, in hardly any clothes, and
like bathers.
looking like males.
Might want to narrow that note.
You know what I mean? But publicly. And I think it's about ridicule. And that's what this is all about. It's got a bottom line, and ridicule is really hard to deal with. And as long as you don't let it get to you, you're okay. But for me, it was ridicule around, my husband's left me at least 20 times so far. Like, God, and I must have run off with all the lesbians in the country. And,
That's why you weren't paying attention to your job.
That's true, And so it's just the way they try and get at you. And I think, I've watched some of these comments about the Prime Minister, and I think time's up. Deirdre Mackin wrote a great article in the Financial Review the other day, and she basically said, listen up, you lot. We've had enough of this. You can't suggest the Prime Minister should be killed, which is what people were suggesting last week, and nobody did anything about it. And you can't suggest these kind of things. It's just not on as a way of behaving in public. And I think it's about time we had a bit of, as she described herself, mum giving you a good slap and saying, get on with yourselves.
And it's about,
stop behaving.
I agree completely. It's get over it. Julia Gillard is the Prime Minister, and when I look, what we should be focusing on, whether you agree with her policies or not, is the fact that she, as Prime Minister, is managing the most difficult parliament that any Prime Minister has ever been given the job of managing. She is negotiating with independents. She doesn't have the luxury that her predecessor Kevin Rudd had, or John Howard had, or any of those male leaders had. She has to negotiate with all of these independents to actually get any agenda through, whether it's hers or theirs. And I'm biased, of course, but I think she's doing an incredible job, and we've just got to move on. She's the Prime Minister, and she's managing the country.
So it brings into question the fact that we assume that the natural habitat of leadership is male. And we are challenging that by doing it. I see it in business all the time. I see when there's nearly a critical mass in a corporation, and suddenly they disappear. And there's no leadership roles for them. And suddenly the direct report looks like Sydney University rugby team with the CEO. And you think, how do you break this through? And it can be so capricious. So that critical mass of people, which it is so crucial, but it's got to be so solid in so many layers, and it's got to have women who are brave enough to speak out.
And to fight back.
And to fight back, and it's got to have women who are prepared to support other women leaders, even if they don't like them. Don't care. Don't care whether you like them or not. You've got to say that this is a breakthrough for women, and you have to do it. And you have to learn to let that stuff, I just say to Pearl, I just think I'm a duck half the time. They're throwing it over my feathers, and I'm just paddling underwater and getting on with it, and I'm going ahead.
That's terrific. We're going to take questions. I know some of you are very keen to ask our panellists some questions. Pop your hand up and someone will come to you with a microphone, and we'll have to make them rather brief because we are running out of time. But just before we go to the questions, I think we've covered a huge amount of ground here, but I just want to ask you, what would be a key tip that you would give to a young woman who's aspiring to a position of leadership, be it in politics, in business, in policing, in community sector, corporate sector, anywhere? What would be a key thing, simple key thing, that you would advise them of? Katy?
I think I would say to them to always believe in yourself and your capacity to do the job.
Wendy?
I'd say keep your head and heart connected and stay and work.
Lovely. Natasha?
Support networks, I'm a big believer in them, whether they're sort of familial, social, political or anything else, I think, and supporting other women. I think men have done that very cleverly for centuries, and I think women should support each other because you're more likely to be played off against each other as well.
Okay, and Christine?
I mean, I think all of those are wonderful things, and I think perhaps adding to that is you do have to do the work. You know, you've got to do the preparation for it. You've got to, go and get the education. You've got to make sure you're in a position and then go for it.
Okay.
Sense of humour helps as well.
Obviously, particularly if you're mistaken as the tea lady. We'll take a question from just up here, and if you wouldn't mind just identifying yourself and where you're from.
My name is Hong Tsai. I'm the finance manager at Canberra Theatre Centre. I just wonder, all this discussion about the difference in styles of leadership, whether that's linked to the ability to deliver the result that people expected. I mean, did they actually make a difference in how you get to the result? What type of leader you are? And
I don't think so. I mean, we see different leaders all over the place and different leadership styles. No leader's the same, indeed. That doesn't necessarily link with have any particular direct link with the results. I mean, the results are around your capacity, and my leadership style is very different to John Stanhope's leadership style, or what it was. But you still deliver the results. You still know what you have to do. How you get there may be a different journey.
Great question. I'm going to take another one from just over here.
Hi, I'm Anne Carl Lambert and I'm too ill to be from anywhere other than Lynham. Chief Minister, you said your style was quite different from Mr Stanhope's, and indeed I heard you interviewed by ABC Radio yesterday. I don't think I've ever heard him interrupted on radio by a little child asking for something, and I'd be interested to know how you're managing that. But a question for all of you. You've all clearly got resilience. In this town over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had 2 senior were resilient who committed suicide.
Question about resilience in particular, and it's an important one, being tough and resilient. Well, we know that you're tough, you've told us, but yeah, resilience, how important is that? I mean, how do you pick yourself up when you've been knocked about? Christine, I think you're the one to answer this right at the moment.
She's here. She's here.
She's here, yes.
I'm here. You're perfectly right. Look, I think the resilience is a really important part, and part of it is learning to let stuff go. Yes. I had a great mentor when I was younger. He said, Christine, you need to let some go through to the keeper. And I think he's right about that. So you've got to figure out what you're going to fight for and what you're going to let go. And that's always helped me. A sense of humour, as Katy said, absolutely important. I mean, I have all the cartoons they've written about me, on my wall, and I think they're fantastic. So I think, you need that sense. You need great networks, Natasha talked about. You need people to ring you up and say, are you okay? And, give you a bit of grounding about how you might deal with something. And I think all of those things are what keeps you strong. And the final bit for me is to say, when someone makes a comment about me, if I don't think much about the person making the comment, I'm not going to let it, go to my heart and go, oh dear, everything's terrible. If it's someone I value, someone I respect, then I'll listen to what they've got to say. But I think we sometimes give ourselves away to people we don't even respect when they make comments about us.
I think the idea of collecting the cartoons is a great idea. Of course, Joan Kerner did that in Victoria. The cartoonist kept depicting her with a spotty polka dress. And she said to me one day, I don't even own a polka dress, but what she did do was hold a spot-on Joan rock concert instead, and got herself a polka dress and really embraced the idea. It was fantastic.
Just because there's been a mention of suicide, can I just say, I'm biased, I'm a director of Beyond Blue, but I think it's really important when we talk about those issues, we remind people that there is help out there, whether it's Lifeline, Beyond Blue, other services, just because that's such a big issue. And I think support networks, helping people, getting people help, and making sure that governments resource those kind of services. But there's no easy answer to that one, but I just wanted to put in a plug, because when you mention those words, we should always mention.
And I just wanted to say
something.
I chair Headspace, the Mental Health Foundation for 12 to 25-year-olds, early intervention. And I think it's really important. I don't know why some children in some families are resilient and others aren't, but we're trying to unravel that, and we know that if we intervene early, there's a chance that you can build resilience, and a lot of it does come from a sense of self.
There was a key message, I think, in what Christine said, to make sure that you also have people to ring up or to come to you and say, you okay? Yeah. You all right? Terrific question. We have another questioner just at the back here.
Hi, it's Fiona Perry from Faxia. I think it's important for women in leadership positions to advance the status of women, not only through their example they take and the policies they pursue. Can you point to some examples in your own careers?
How long have you got?
Yes, that's quite a complex question, because I think everyone sitting on the stage would have many, many, many examples that they would like to point to. But I think it's an interesting one too. It's saying, let's take away the female stuff and just point to the important stuff that we've done as women leaders.
Well, I'll just give you one example of, in my first term in the Parliament, myself and a number of other women members of the Assembly, and indeed a male member of the Assembly, Wayne Berry, we joined together and decriminalised abortion here in the ACT, and we led the way on that. And that was a direct result of having women in the Parliament. It had been tried before and it hadn't been able to be done, and we did it.
And I'd go to the ABC and say that one of the great things, the 3 women caucused on the ABC board, and we got childcare throughout the ABC, we got women reading the news and carrying sound gear. Yay. And every single selection committee had to have a woman on it, and they had to interview a woman. When they found they couldn't find one, we said, if you're not careful, we will. They found one immediately.
Aren't we grateful for the fact that we carry the gear now? Thanks, Wendy, that's great. We have another question here from Danelle from UN Women.
Oh, thank you very much. I was wondering if we could look a bit harder at the question of work structures and your issue about fertility and women having babies just when their career's just about to take off, and the pressures that there are to work extremely long hours, which fit a model quite nicely if there's a wife at home but not so well in other circumstances. Are there chances, do you think, that we might be able to attack those structures and move into a more friendly sort of arrangement which suits men and women?
Can I throw that first to Katy Gallagher? As Chief Minister, I know this is a bugbear of yours.
It really is, because I think, going back to an earlier point we were discussing, you can have legislation, you can have policies that set the framework and establish the law, but it's actually the behaviour inside an organisation that makes the biggest difference to women, and particularly women who might be juggling a whole range of caring responsibilities, whether it be children or elderly parents. You know, when I started in the Assembly, I was a single mother with a 3 or 4-year-old, and we used to sit till 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, what on earth is that about? I mean, we're sitting...
Didn't want to go home, some of them.
That's right, and you could have some very long after-dinner speeches from some very elderly gentlemen who, you know, it would be nice at a different time, but, you know, could you make good laws at 4 o'clock in the morning? Could I run my house? Could, you know, my mother sitting on my couch watching after my little girl while she slept, while I, you know, send a message home, I'm not sure when we're finishing tonight, question mark. I mean, women look at that and think, well, no, I can't do that. I couldn't do that in a long term, and we changed it. You know, we adjourn at 6:30 now on a sitting day. We get our job done. Nobody's given 10 extensions of time to tell us their life history 4 times a day. That it doesn't work. It doesn't matter anymore, you know. And so we've changed the structures in the Assembly so we can be efficient, get the job done, and get home. And I think the community, I don't think there's a problem with that. I've worked with people who've spent 15 hours at work, and I can tell you, someone who's focused for 7 hours, full on at work, can get the job done, and it shouldn't be determined by hours of work. Just because you're there and your car's in the car park means nothing to me. It's actually what you deliver at the end of the day.
Hear, hear to that. Okay, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have to wind it up. I think we've heard some tremendous insights here today, and I think the women have been incredibly generous in what they've shared with us. But to close the event, I'd like to call again on Professor Mark Evans.
Well, it just remains for me to thank our 6 magnificent women for their incredible contribution to what was really quite an inspirational conversation. And also to thank Virginia, who has put an incredible amount of work into this event, far beyond the causes. And also a personal thanks to Nilma Matai, who's done an extremely amazing job in terms of logistics. And finally, I should also thank our token male, Peter Leahy, for putting himself in what could be, for many men, viewed to be a very difficult situation and coming out on very much on top. So thank you very much, Peter. We have some mementos to thank our guests for taking the time out of their very busy schedules to be with us today. And I would also like to thank everybody for supporting this event, and I hope we can see you all at our next Parliamentary Triangle seminar, which is on the vexed question of what happens, shock horror, when citizens make policy. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have to conclude at this point, and I would ask you all to be upstanding to farewell the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, Her Excellency Quentin Bryce, and we're very grateful that she could come and join us today and share with us this event and also share some of her insight. Thank you very much, Governor-General.